In the last year, there have been many discussions, panels, and books, articles, journals about the war in Iraq, as well as the war on terror throughout the world. As you can imagine, many of those discussions have focused on foreign policy objectives, sort of maybe a top-down, even sometimes intellectual approach. However, one of the perspectives that sometimes is missing is the perspective of the front line. As I mentioned before, Dodge Billingsley has been a regular presenter here at the Kennedy Center. Today, he will be talking about Iraq, 1 year, looking back and looking forward. Dodge's expertise in documenting war and his energy in presenting to our students makes him one of our favorite presenters here at the Kennedy Center. His company, Combat Films and Research, completed Swift Company K-325, Marines Engaged in West Africa, this past December. The film chronicles Kylo Company, 3rd Battalion, 25th Marine Regiment on a live-fire training exercise in West Africa. CF&R also released Virgin Soldiers this past year. This documentary follows the advance from Kuwait to Baghdad of an 11-man squad of the Marine 1st Division, India Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment during Operation Iraqi Freedom. In fall 2001, Billingsley spent several months working in Afghanistan, close to the battle for Mazar-i-Sharif, documenting the experience with Paul Ewell in The House of War, which was released in the United Kingdom. He was also one of only 2 foreigners on hand at the prisoner revolt that took the life of CIA agent Mike Spann. Billingsley returned to Afghanistan just months following the Mazar-i-Sharif uprising, this time with U.S. allied troops during Operation Anaconda, as chronicled in Close Combat Attack Apaches, D-Day Operation Anaconda. Having produced and directed documentaries on location from United Arab Emirates to Africa and from Abkhazia to China, Billingsley continues to be involved in conflicts plaguing the world. He received a bachelor's degree in history from Columbia University and a master's degree in war studies from London's King's College. We welcome here at the Kennedy Center back Dodge Billingsley.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. Was there anybody here last semester? So you sat through my lecture before? Okay. Well, then I'll make it different. Actually, what Corey, that was a great introduction, actually. And the only thing I can say is when I first started studying war and conflict, I wanted to be a defense analyst until I became a defense analyst. And I realized I didn't want to sit behind a desk and read a bunch of stuff coming in. I didn't want to do it. It was really boring. I realized I wanted to be out on the front line, out in the field, and come up with my own data and my own material. So I started, it was back before there were DV-cam cameras. I took Hi8, was the format of the time, and I believe that you could chronicle combat through video. It would help you to understand, and it'd help on a research basis. And so that's kind of how it started, and since then we've sort of evolved into making a lot of for-public documentaries, as well as using this video material. For different lessons learned, we get invited back to the General Staff and Command College usually 2-3 times a year to discuss what we saw, what we documented during certain military operations. And that's been fun for us because at the same time it allows me to get the perspective of senior military commanders, those who've just come back from the field, those are being groomed to go back out and for their senior positions. Anyway, Iraq, it's all about Iraq, right? I hope this isn't too distracting. I'm going to show some clips from this film, probably toward the middle as the title, to the middle of the lecture, as the title of the lecture is looking back, looking forward, or something like that. I'll tell you a little bit about my experience, and then I'm going to show you some clips and talk a little bit about what's going on now and what we're going to go into, and then we'll have some question and answers. But as Corey mentioned, I wanted to see what it was like on the front line. You heard, I'm sure that everybody, that the media predominantly was embedded. And what that meant was that we were all attached to different units. Before the embed process was official, I had made an arrangement to go with a combat infantry unit into Iraq. And the only trick was, back then, everything was classified as far as who would get the good combat assignment. So we were juggling between the 101st and the Marines to try to figure out who would get the best combat assignment, because the last thing you want to do is sit with a bunch of guys guarding a helicopter, refueling station. And we went into the SF, who's a Green Beret, the 5th group, said, you know what, I can't tell you the plan, but I know where I'm going to be, and I know where you ought to be. So he guided us to this Marine unit, and we locked on with them back over in 29 Palms, California. We spent 2 to 3 weeks with them there doing some desert training, going through gas mask training, firing all the weapons, doing things like that. And then made our way to Kuwait, and we sat in the desert for about 9 weeks because we were one of the first Marine units over there. Of course, the Army's 3rd ID was there from the fall, but we were part of the initial buildup. And then, of course, we crossed the line of departure on the morning, I think, of the 21st of March or 20th of March, and part of 2 main efforts, the Army, which went west, and then the Marines that went basically right up the middle, hit through Basra, the 2 main highways splitting the river delta, the Tigris and Euphrates River. And then, as you know, they culminated in Baghdad for the most part, the Marines taking the east half of Baghdad, the Army taking the west half of Baghdad. What was interesting, I think about foreign policy all the time, and I think about how the Bush administration sold the war effort. I think about how it was conducted, and what really strikes me is when foreign policy turns to war, whether that's an evolution or an escalation or a disaster in foreign policy, but when foreign policy becomes war, you have hundreds and hundreds of groups of 18 to 22-year-old infantry soldiers or Marines at the front carrying out foreign policy. And they refer to themselves as the tip of the spear. There were a lot of spears in the Iraqi campaign, Afghan as well. But each one of these tips of the spear was no more than 2 or 3 armored vehicles as part of a company full of 19 to 20 sweaty Marines or soldiers who would jump out and fight whenever they were called to do so. And that is foreign policy on the front. And I think that's interesting because in the planning sessions at the DOD, or at the Pentagon, or in Doha, the CENTCOM control center in the Middle East, it probably looks really interesting on the maps and with the graphics and everything, but out on the front, it's dirty, it's grimy. We ran out of food for 3 days. Supplies don't always make it. M16s, the Marines are a very, very poor branch of the service. Their weapons were breaking. Their takedown pins were falling out, so we were holding half of my squad's M16s were held together by duct tape and baling wire. I had flexibility to move within or between units, so I jumped a MP vehicle one day and went up the main supply route and tried to talk to Regimental Armory so that I could get a bunch of takedown pins for my squad, because I wanted their weapons to work if we needed them. And everybody's weapon, they were short of takedown pins. And the Army, of course, they use some newer, more updated equipment, but they still had their issues. It's a very dirty, grimy affair. War is clean until it actually is war on the front, and then it's anything but clean. And I'm really bouncing around a lot, but and I'll open it up to questions. One of the things that struck me most of all was how we fought the war. And I want to say that, I think that over the past few decades, we've been sold the idea that smart or precision weapons are smart and precision oriented to the point that, yes, we can hit an intel center next to a mosque and a grocery store. And it's more or less true, but nothing is ever perfect. And so the idea that you could go into a war and not ever inflict a civilian casualty is just unrealistic. But I think the public is used to hearing smart bomb, precision guided munition, things like this, and it sort of taints the way we look at warfare. And we need to remember that once you go to war, it's a very dangerous duty. And the way America fights war, and I talked about this last time, was we do the utmost to protect our troops. And we don't throw the human wave of troops at you that we might have been accused of doing in maybe the island hopping campaigns in World War II or even the Korean War. It has really evolved. Military doctrine on a tactical level has evolved to the point that the tactics and doctrine employed in military assignments, first and foremost, it is of paramount importance to protect the individual soldier. And I threw this number out last lecture, but in the Vietnam War we lost what, 50,000 dead, more or less. I think it was more. Since Vietnam, there's only been, up until Operation Iraqi Freedom, 500 U.S. KIA in all combat since Vietnam. That is that's like an unbelievable number. That's like nothing. It's minuscule. I'm not saying those 500 deaths didn't count, but when you consider what we lost in these other wars, and we've had a number of combat assignments since then, the doctrine is protect your troops, and we want, you never leave a man behind. You hear that statement, and bring everybody home. You hear these kind of things, but they reflect the doctrine. Now, for the individual soldier, that was kind of a bummer because I don't care how many people join the Army or the Marines to go to college, half of them join to jump out of planes and kill people, and they will tell you that. They're young, that's something they always want to do, they saw it in the movies, and they want to do it. So what happened in Iraq, there were very few infantry engagements. Normally, tanks lead, and then you have combined anti-armor teams called CAT, and these are Humvees, which are basically just troop personnel carrier, just like a Jeep. You know what Humvees are. And they'll have a tow missile or a 50 caliber mounted on the top. They can inflict an incredible amount of damage on a target. And then you have the infantry in these tracks, and we're still considered the tip of the spear. It's just that you're not going to jump out and fight a tank with infantry. You're going to let your tank take care of them. And the U.S. tank on the battle is the dominant tank on the battlefield worldwide. It took out targets at such great ranges. The infantry, we're standing up on the track. Everybody's got their M16s pointed, and they're taking out individual snipers at 1,500 meters with their 50 caliber. And we weren't even seeing them. We just see the tracer fire go out and know that there's 5 shots between each red tracer. And then you drive up a half mile, and there'd be some bodies in the burned out Iraqi tank. And that was it. Most of the shots taken were taken by tankers. Tankers were in the battle a lot. But to the individual soldier, it was very boring for most of them, and really a pain because they all wanted to get out there. And so, like I say, some just wanted to jump out of planes and kill people. Other people thought, well, I've trained for 4 years, I might as well fire a couple shots, right? It didn't mean there weren't casualties. There were casualties. I can't remember the exact number. There were 2 or 3 sustained fights. But what was interesting also was that every time we pulled into a battle or something that was supposed to be a battle, the Iraqis had abandoned the position, and it was taken with very few casualties, if any. We took 13 prisoners on our first engagement right across the border at an Iraqi Mechanized Infantry Division headquarters. And I know we didn't kill anybody, so I think they just had 13 guys left. Everybody else deserted or had left. And those prisoners were taken. The instructions for my unit, and I don't know if this was to reflect what they thought might happen as a result of the Gulf War 1991, but our instruction was, don't even take prisoners, just take their guns, take their ammo, and tell them to walk east. And that's all we did. Every time we came upon Iraqis that wanted to surrender, we just said, go east, go toward the Iranian border. And then there were supposedly some other units just going to take these prisoners. I don't know if they ever did or not. But the idea was speed of advance all the way to Baghdad. As you probably know from the news, there was a time when there was about a week where it felt like everything ground to a stop, that we were maybe losing the war, that I think a couple of the commanders said that it's going to take a lot longer than they expected. On March 25th, basically, there were a number of ambushes across both fronts. A friend of mine in 2-5 was 3-5. They were ambushed, probably, I think, the most serious of all the Marine Corps units, and they had a couple people killed in their unit. We were ambushed, but it was nothing more than 4 or 5 mortar rounds, half a dozen RPGs, and then, I don't know, they fired a bunch of guns, but, it's not too much. And again, the idea of overwhelming force and protect your soldiers. If an RPG came into our position, or as we're driving down the road in our column, racing toward the next objective, everything would stop, turn to the side, and obliterate the landscape. And if you recall a lot of the news reports, I didn't see any of this while I was out there because I had a very small view of the war. But you could see the firefight was a lot of U.S. fire being taken out, but you very, very rarely hear any Iraqi fire coming in. And that was kind of how the battles were for the most part, that they didn't stand and fight. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't have either, because nobody can put the amount of firepower to bear as the U.S., as the Chechens have learned in Russia, that the Russians, a modern mechanized military machine can put tremendous amounts of fire down. In fact, I'll just go back a little bit, digress to the Chechen War. The Chechens that I was with there in the mid-90s told me that in the cities they were fine because they could hide between buildings, and in the mountains they were fine because every hairpin turn was just a death trap for a Russian tank, because you could get close to an RPG and hit it at 50 yards and that's it. But in that flatland between the city and the mountains where the Chechens had no cover, the Russians just took a tremendously heavy toll on them, and basically it would decimate any Chechen movement in that belt. And so the Chechens had to learn to stay out of that area. I think the Iraqis, and I'm not saying they learned lessons from Chechnya, I don't even know if they did any homework at all, but we did see, or I think it was evident that they picked their battles, they picked their spaces very well. Task Force Tarawa was hit, and Al Nazariya, after the army had already rolled through. And it was kind of like, well, it's not a big deal, we'll go through, and it was fine. Anyway, that's a little bit about how things were fought. I want to show you some video clips, and like I said, I'm really flying through this because I want to talk about what's going forward. I'm going to show you 3 clips. I'm going to show you the open, and then we're going to skip to scene 7, talk about ROEs, or rules of engagement, and then I'm going to talk about Salmon Pack. Salmon Pack, I'll just preface it real quick, is one of the big bath party and feeding centers of gravity, and we were told by Special Forces Intel, their S2 officers came up. We were at a joint mission with the Special Forces, and basically they said, we want you to go down this narrow road, and there's 4 or 5 buildings. We need you to attack and secure the middle building because we need all this intel that's inside. And because we need the intel, you can't use anything larger than 60mm mortar. And all the troops, of course, were like cussing and swearing. This is ridiculous, you know, because we want to just use everything we can. They want to use AT-4s or SMOs or anything they can, because why put yourself toe-to-toe with the enemy? But Intel's, you know, SF guys said, no, we have to have this building, so if it's heavily defended, you got to fight your way out of it, house, you know, block by block into that section, window by window. You got to take that building intact. So we went in with the idea that it was going to be pretty bad, and they told us to expect 1,000 to 3,000 enemy personnel, and my company had 208 men and me. And so I was unarmed, and 208 were armed. But I was stuffing ammo and grenades into my pockets because I thought, man, if it goes down, you know, it'd be better to be somewhat prepared than not at all prepared. And it was a little unnerving to have that kind of intel report. So we all sat around scratching our head waiting for a night, because it was going to be a night attack, which also was interesting because we had everybody had night vision goggles, but only half of them worked. And so the other half was basically going to follow the guys with night vision in there. And I thought, it just seemed, I couldn't believe we were doing it. And I remember listening to Corporal Urena tell Corporal Velasquez, I said, you know, he said, I just know I'm going to die tonight. And and it was like kind of out of a movie. He said, take this letter, give it to my mom. Here's one for my wife, and you know, you're my best friend. And I just remember sitting in the track hearing him. I'm like, I don't even need to hear this, because it was wigging me out. And I didn't have anybody I could exchange a letter with, because I was twice the age of everybody in the silly track. I should have been a regimental command with all the other lieutenant colonels and colonels who were my age. But it turned out, and I probably shouldn't give the story away, but they brought in air power, and they were going to hit it with, they were going to send 15,000 artillery rounds on the selected target as well. So we were all pretty confident, like, oh, that'll blow everybody up. But, you know, I covered a lot of combat, and those things never blow everybody up. You can always hide. And so we sat there and we watched the airstrike, you know, for a little while. And first, it was going to be an hour of artillery, and then some fixed air assets, fixed wing assets, and then the Cobras were going to help us. The artillery goes, and it goes for like 10 minutes. And I said, oh, they're wrapping up artillery early. A B-52's coming in. Okay, great. So we're waiting for the B-52 strike, and we're watching it all through our night vision. And it doesn't, nothing happens. And then we hear over the radio, oh, they were carrying cluster bombs. And they don't drop cluster bombs into an area that your own friendly troops are going to go into, because cluster bombs have a 30% dud ratio. We had 4 casualties on the first day because our group walked into a minefield. Well, it wasn't a minefield. It was a field that had been bombed by U.S. B-52s carrying cluster bombs, and we had 4 casualties. One Marine blew both of his feet off. Another one blew another foot off. Another one blew his hand off. Somebody else trying to help the other Marine, and it was just because they had these cluster bomblets, these little clusters. And so because they had the wrong munitions, they had to call off the B-52 strike, because that would have created more peril for us. Anyway, we go in, and then the airstrike's called off. We're like, okay, great. We had 10 minutes of artillery, no airstrike, and the Cobras were cut from like 4 to 2. And we went rolling in, and it's the only time in the whole engagement where we had our hatches closed, so we weren't standing up and just firing as we drove in. So we had the hatches closed, so we're just sitting down there, and you could hear all this machine gun fire and rounds going off, and we were all like, oh my gosh, we're going right into like hell. I mean, it's like it's on, you know. And the back opens up, and as one Marine said, you know, he goes, you never know if you're going to catch a face full of rounds or not. When the back opens, you don't know what's going to be there. Maybe there's going to be somebody got you on the hill, it's going to start just laying into you. And the back opened up, and we all spilled out, and the grass was high, and it was dark, and we couldn't really see, and we're stumbling over everybody. And what was interesting was there were no Iraqis there. They had left. But there was enough artillery that had put all the buildings on fire, including the one where the intel was. So it was completely destroyed. And there were these just papers by the millions floating up into the horizon because of the heat of the fire. Everything was on fire. And the SF guys came rolling in afterwards, and they looked around, and they're like, oh, that's not very good. And they just jumped back in their little technicals and drove off because there was no intel to gather. Anyway, I am really going, I shouldn't have told you the story, but if you hear me, but it was just one of those things that there were never, when a pitched battle was supposed to happen, it didn't happen. When we're driving down the road, we were ambushed. And that was the kind of a story of how the war, I think, went down through the invasion, through the through the sieging of Baghdad. If the control guy can hear me, I'm going to go ahead and roll the open. And then we're going to just watch 3 scenes all together. There might be some swearing in here. I did, anyway, I don't know. And you can turn the volume up. Can we go to scene 7 now? This may take a second. This is rules of engagement.
Okay, when we're moving up, we're gonna make a wedge. Kilo's gonna be in the rear. India on the left. William on the right. Alpha tanks. India and Lima are gonna push. We're gonna push. Their missions push straight through the oil fields. Kilo company, they're basically a mop-up crew. They're gonna go through and find, sweep everything through the oil fields. And Alpha tanks are gonna be located in the general area of Tampa. Alright. You guys got any questions?
Do you have any ROEs?
With engagement?
Yes.
It's combat.
Kill them all.
You can't shoot, if they're not a combatant, don't shoot them. If you're trying to surrender, don't shoot them. If they're walking towards you with a weapon in their hand that they won't put up their hands, that's combatant. Alright? Or if they're running away with a weapon in their hand, that's still a combatant. That's either drop the weapon.
E means yes and non means no.
We go to scene 13.
We got first the guard shack, then we got Republican Guard facility, Republican Guard headquarters, that friggin' security building, and then battalion objective 14 down here at the administrative building. I think there are 1,000 to 3,000 enemy forces. Now who are these guys? Fucking a mixed bag of cats. It's back party officials, it's security guys, it's Republican Guard guys, it's Republican Guard headquarters guys. Friggin' Fedayeen, and they think there's a terrorist camp down here too, so it's just a wild bunch of bad dudes. So when we make this attack, if somebody comes at you, like he's coming toward you, it's really close, freeze.
Hey, push up to the tree line in front of the track.
They're fighting holes, aren't they?
Push to the tree line.
Got a bunker here on the right.
Fence that goes all the way around the
supposed to be the biggest battle. It was a walk in nothing for us, because all the fucking heroes and fixed me took everything out. I'm happy. They do my work for me, shit.
The Great American Iraq War. Now I know how Rome became an empire. Beat up fucking sucked. Rule the world. All third world countries. It was an experience, though, I guess. Especially all the pretend stories I'm gonna tell my friends when I get home. How the mortar fire took off the front end of our track. We ran out. The 50 cal fell, so I picked it up. Firing it by the hip. Ran out of ammo, got some 550 cord and hoisted up the Mark 19. Shot it from the chest. Those are the stories my grandkids are gonna hear.
Go ahead and pause it. If you can go to the special features to the bus stop. I'm going to show you one other scene and then we'll talk about it. And I'm going to try to cut out of it right after. Yeah, some bonus scenes and it'll be bus stop at Al Rashid. Okay, we can stop it there. What's that? Yeah, I want to bring that up because you heard the lieutenant tell us when we were going to Salmon Pack, he goes, listen, it's a bad place. If anybody comes at you in civilian clothes, you grease them, and that's it. There had been, one thing I did a lot of in the war was sit and listen to radio traffic a lot. The radio, I mean, I love these guys. They were young though, and they would fall asleep a lot. So I took radio watch for a lot of days, and I would hear all kinds of battalion and regimental traffic on the radio, which is fascinating. I wish I could have recorded it. But one thing that came across were reports that I think there was a car bomb and a couple cars stopped at checkpoints in the Army sector where they had either shot Army soldiers or the car blown up. And so there was a message, one, that was being sent out to all the companies was you don't let anybody within your perimeter. And two, you hold your checkpoints way enough away so that if it is a suicide car bomb or something like that, that you don't bring it into your line and, you know, everybody dies. Is actually probably where the tankers, it was a tanker's mistake. The bus somehow got in on our back. We had been exchanging fire with, we're in the outskirts of Baghdad, April 6th, exchanging fire with Iraqis and RPG fire all morning long, and this bus just comes in kind of fast behind, and we all turn. Snipers hit it first, then the 50 cal and the combined anti-armor team, and then a number of soldiers who were standing around all opened up on this bus. You could see it was shot up a lot. The Iraqi gentleman runs out, unbeknownst to him, right towards our command post, and he is gunned down, as you can see. The other two in the bus were each had like 6 or 7 bolts in them, but believe it or not, arms, leg, buttocks, they were fine. They were patched up. The medics patched them up right away, and they probably received better medical care from the Marines. But what was interesting is nobody knew why they did that. With the ID, all of them had military ID on them. They were middle or low-ranking Iraqi officers. They were majors. They were not Republican Guard. They weren't anything special. They were in civilian clothes. There were small arms on the bus. But there were, I remember when the bus came rolling across that, and stopped, and we were all afraid because, if it was full of dynamite or something, 30 meters, we were all well within the blast radius. We all would have probably been dead. It turned out that it wasn't like anything like that. We don't know why they rolled in. How they could have missed the fact that 2 entire companies rolled into their military base overnight, I don't know. But, that was kind of the standing order. You just didn't know, and again, you protect, and so you shoot first in those situations. And it's not a negative thing. It's just goes back to the idea of smart bombs, precision-guided munitions, that war can be clean. When you do unleash the tips of the spear, and they're all 19 to 22-year-olds, they're doing the best they can, but they have to make that decision like right now. We're working on a program right now with the General Staff and Command College and the Kennedy Center called Fog of War, because I felt like it needs to be explained that the battlefield is complicated, and you have only a second to make your decisions, and you make them based on your intel, whatever your latest intel is, which is sometimes, if not often, wrong or incomplete. It's more fair to say perhaps it's incomplete, and your training, and you do that. You make those decisions based on that, and hopefully we'll have this film done for next semester and we can show it here. And it's going to feature this bus incident. We're going out to interview these Marines. Consequently, or incidentally, these Marines are going back. 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, the 1st MEF is going back to Iraq. Actually now, the first units are boarding right now from March Air Force Base in Southern California. And they're all going back for at least a 6-month, probably a 1-year deployment. But it's interesting to watch how the war's being fought now, or the peace, it depends what side of the fence, I guess, you sit on. What's going on in Iraq, as I sort of alluded to, and I'll go into it, it's a huge troop rotation going on now. Basically, everybody's coming out, and all new units are going back in. But in the last 15 years, or since I guess, 89, the Army and the armed services have been cut back, especially on ground units. And so I think that we feel this more as a country because, for instance, I think Army, a lot of their support elements were moved to reserve status as a way, in the late 80s, early 90s, as a way to protect their combat assets when it came to the decision-making, or when it was decided they had to cut divisions. The downside of that is when they deploy for Afghanistan and Iraq, you have to call up a boatload of reservists just to support your combat elements. And so you see a lot of reservists being called up all around the country, and that seems to be a little bit more difficult, I think, on the public psyche, because they're not really ever supposed to be there. A lot of reservists probably don't think they're ever going to have to serve a 1-year deployment, especially in the combat zone, but there's a lot of reservists over there. In fact, they say that 40% of the new rotation will be reservists. There's only 1 battalion that I know about in the entire Marine Corps that has not been deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq, and it's scheduled to go in 2005, and that's it. Everybody's gone at least once. They are doing a lot of recruiting. A friend of mine is a civilian contractor. He operates a recruiting station, the only satellite recruiting station in Iraq. It's in Mosul, and they're trying to recruit the new Iraqi army. They do quick and dirty background checks. They try to weed out the undesirables that way. They're trying to get the right ethnic mix and then trying to get people who will actually stay. And they haven't wanted to do many stories on it. CENTCOM has been a little bit basically what's happened is a lot of the Iraqis that are joining the new Iraqi army are dropping out before they even get to their 8-week boot camp. We're going over there to spend some time with them. I'm leaving the 1st of March, and we're going to be with 2 units. We're going to be with an Army Striker, one of the Army Striker units up in the north, in either Mosul, I'm not sure where they're being moved around. And we're also going to be with some of these civilian recruiters doing the new Iraqi army, recruiting the new Iraqi army. And I'm really anxious to see how that's going. They're opening up 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, I think 5 more satellite recruiting stations in the next month to try to get this off the ground, because as probably everybody knows, there is an effort to want to turn the country over to Iraqis, and obviously I think all the Iraqis, most of them want to do it themselves, but they're trying to get this security mechanism in place. Oh, a note about the contractors, I think, which is something that's interesting. The 101st Airborne came out. They're pretty much all gone, or they're all out of Iraq. They were stationed around the Mosul area, and as you remember, they were the unit that took credit or was involved in getting Saddam's two sons. They've been replaced by Gurkhas hired by Kroll, private contractor out of New York City, and the Gurkhas are doing all the security for the other U.S. contractors out of Dynacorp and SAIC who are recruiting the new Iraqi army. So it's a very interesting picture up there, which is one reason we want to go up to Mosul, because there's just not any troops doing that kind of thing. It's all private contractors, a lot of ex-military people. And again, depending on what side of the fence you sit on, some people just say, oh, they're just mercenaries. You know, I guess they obviously are, but they carry weapons and they get paid. But I don't know if that, but they're doing all the recruiting up there. I know this thing ends at 1, and so I want to kind of open it up for questions because I think we can discuss it a lot, different ways. I know that the lecturer said looking back and looking forward, and I think everybody's in a hurry to get out of Iraq, or a lot of people are, but I think we all realize we're going to be in it for a while, the long haul. The U.S. will be there for a while, and there are these efforts going on, and the war is different now. As you watch on TV, I think it said, I mentioned a Utah soldier was killed yesterday by a homemade explosive device, or day before yesterday. We'll probably continue to see that general casualty attrition rate. It'll be small numbers, but not insignificant, and certainly not to those families and those communities, but it'll be small numbers compared to the over 100,000 troops that we'll have in place. Let me just open it up for questions, and if we can go from there. Is there anything I said that makes anybody uncomfortable, confused, or curious? But, okay, and I'll repeat the question too. How accurately is the media portraying the military activity or what's going on in Iraq? I think that the friction, there's also a friction between the military and the media that will always exist, because the media needs a story for it to be a story. So the death of a soldier is a story. If you consider that we've lost over 500, and that's out of a group of, that's a minuscule amount of, and I'm not saying it justifies, and that's up for each person to decide, but it's a very small amount considering the fact there's 120,000 U.S. troops there. Also, when you consider that 80% of them are lost in the Sunni Triangle, that's a hazardous duty area for sure, from Tikrit to Baghdad. Well, what's the western city? But that's that area that Saddam is basically his clan, his family. That's where he's strongest. They pick up those stories all the time. We hear about every soldier that dies, right? So we get those stories. I know, talking to friends of mine in the military over there, that kind of annoys them. Yet it's the media. I mean, it's TV. I talked to the people at CBS, and I pitched to them 3 or 4 different, because they asked me if I want to do some, hey, what do you got? Let's do something, 60 minutes too. And every time I pitch an idea, it's like, wow, I don't know, And they're interested in the new Iraqi army story, but we're not sure if we could actually cover that for general, because they want it to be a positive thing, and they want to show Iraq the army wants to show, the military wants to show Iraq being in positive light, obviously. The media, I guess, boils down to the media sometimes doesn't find too much use out of positive stories, but they do sometimes. But I think it's the story of the dead and wounded that always show up first. So it's always going to be a friction, there, because the thing is, if you're a CEO of a company and you have problems or whatever, or someone's an idiot or this or that, you fire them, right? And if you're like a battalion commander, a regimental commander, or something like that, and you have soldiers that maybe shoot before they should, or maybe get killed, and that, it's a life and death situation, unfortunately, in combat. So it's different. So stakes are higher, and there's more tension, and it's sometimes. Now I really rambled on that one, didn't I? Sorry, I butchered your question.
A big debate on if we have enough forces there. Due to this presidential campaign, Rumsfeld, and everything. What's the feeling of the people there? Do we have enough forces over there? Do you have a feel for that?
I don't know if there's do we have enough forces in Iraq to take care of the situation? I don't know. I haven't heard any general consensus from the troops like that I was with. Oh, we need more, we need less. I think, I mean, we could certainly use more, I'm sure. But it depends, I think, what the objectives are. Is they try to reestablish or get the Iraqi police force back on its feet, get the Iraqi army back on its feet, and hire out some to contractors, which frees some of the military units up. I think it's safe to say if we had a couple extra divisions we could put in there, or put somewhere in our, we would probably, I think Rumsfeld and those guys would like to do it, but the Army stretched pretty thin. I mean, they have 9,000 troops in Afghanistan, and in my view, that's the place where we don't have anywhere near enough troops. It's a mountainous area. We have a lot of conflict going on in the Pakistan area, on the border with Pakistan. And friends of mine in the 82nd Airborne said that they basically would patrol 2 days a week. They patrol every day with the intent of getting shot at, so then they could bring in larger assets and crush whoever's shooting at them. And that was all they did. They were bait every day. And they said they were usually ambushed twice a week on average. But the U.S. soldiers, they wear body armor, they wear Kevlar. They can take a tremendous amount of fire, and they don't have that many casualties even with that kind of strategy. But that's where I think we're really low on troops. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, man, the Marines and the Army, it is so funny. Every time a mistake happens in war, as far as the Marine, it's the Army's fault. And every time, I'm sure it's the other way around. I mean, every time we had to pause for 20 minutes, oh, the stupid Army, I'm sure another supply convoy went off track. They're probably at the pool or something. And it's every single day. We ran out of food for 3 days, and we actually went to the main supply route and used our duffel bags that we keep our sleeping bags in, and we picked up leftover trash from the MREs, the meals ready to eat, and we then divvied it out amongst our company because that was the only food we had for 3 days. And then they were thankful to the Army, but then cursing them because they waste so much, they throw so much stuff away. But then we're eating everything they threw away, And that's good. You need that rivalry, and you need that sense of pride in your unit, and that's what they're definitely a difference. I had a point I was going to make with that, but I can't. Did that answer your question? Or? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, we did actually. Up and even till April 6th, we kept hearing rumors. They called it the Lance Corporal Hotline, which basically meant it was nothing, but it's like they are always the ones talking. And in between tracks, they're always on the radio. Oh, I don't think we're going to Baghdad. I heard the Army's going to take the whole thing for themselves. Yeah, those jerks. It's like back and forth, back and forth. And even on April 6th, when we were at Al Rashid, before we crossed the river there, we were thinking we were going to be held up and not take Baghdad. And in the beginning, we thought we weren't going to take Baghdad. And then on the 25th, when we got ambushed, we went into like a 5-day pause. We thought, and everybody's like, the Army's just going to take it for themselves, And so this is a constant battle for them. There's a good book called The March Up, and it's by 2 retired Marine Corps generals. And I ran into these guys in Al Numania. They convinced the Marines. The Marines are a lot smaller group than the Army, so they kind of have a little more flexibility. These 2 retired generals convinced the Marine Corps and these were Vietnam generals. One fought in the Battle of Hue City in Vietnam. He commanded a rifle company. So these guys have been around for a while, but they convinced the command to let them go as unpaid consultants. So then they were out on the net, so all the Marine units knew they were in there. And they cruised around in an old truck they captured from the Iraqis right on D+1 around Safwan. And they put the markings on so they wouldn't get attacked by helicopters or anything. And they just drove from unit to unit. And they're like, one guy had a cowboy hat on. They're both in their like late 60s or early 70s. And their book is great because they just floated from unit to unit. And we talked to them about the whole thing. And they, just wasn't sure what was going to happen. The plans kept changing. And we weren't sure if we're going to get to go to Baghdad or not. But that's another thing about, fog of war, which something we want to bring out is that you get an order. You get a warning order, then you get an order, and then as soon as the first round goes down range, as soon as the first shot is fired, you just assume you're going to get it out. 1,000 frag orders basically means change of order because once the battle starts, everything changes. And it's that case, we got in the track, stop, start, stop, start. At one time, we didn't leave the track for 32 hours. We went to the bathroom in that track in our plastic bags. We ate in that track. It was a nightmare. It was the worst 32 hours of my life. We never left that armored vehicle because we kept getting ordered to go this way, then stop, then that way, then stop. And because we were responding to calls for support for different things that were happening, it turned out we didn't really do anything. And 32 hours later, they let us get out, dig a fighting hole, and a quarter of us were allowed to go to sleep at a time. And you rotated. So anyway, yeah.
You talked a lot about the supply problem in yesterday's article in the New York Times about the history of the Army, the first one. Talked about the same thing. Do you know of anything preliminary they're talking about fixing sort of thing?
Supplies problem. You know, it's funny when I go to the General Staff Command College, one thing I love to do is sit around and talk with FMSO, Foreign Military Studies Office, or the CALL, Center for Army Lessons Learned, and they talk about that a lot. There will always be a budget issue which revolves basically around making life easier and more workable for the fighter, the fighting soldier, the infantryman, as opposed to the big blue tick, the blue chip item, big ticket items like subs or ships or sexy planes, and that's a huge budget issue all the time. The Marine Corps gets 6% of the Navy budget because they fall into the Navy budget, and the Navy wants new ships and new this and new that and everything else. The Marine fights for everything they get. That's why they use, their average helicopter in their fleet, the CH-46, it's like 26 years old. When I got in that helicopter leaving Baghdad, I was as scared then as any time I couldn't believe that helicopter. I mean, it was terrible. And I thought, wow, this is what they fly around. Army has more money, but it's still a budgetary item. And as far as straightening out supply, I don't know. But I mean, as far as the guns and weapons and things like this, there's always an effort to get more resources into the hands of the fighting soldier. But it's still always a battle when they want, new Comanche helicopter. And that's, for instance, do we need a new attack helicopter? Don't know if we need one, but there's an awful lot of money going into the development of the Comanche. A lot of soldiers would rather just went into combat troops. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't have ran out of food. That was silly. It was ridiculous. And we were hungry.
Yeah. What is your view of the intelligence issues currently on the front burner?
Yeah, I wrote some notes on that, but I didn't get into it. I think intel's horrible. I think it's absolutely horrible. In Afghanistan, it was horrible. In Operation Anaconda, we are assaulted into supposedly some blocking positions. I mean, this is on a tactical level. And the SF, Special Forces, and Afghan Army were supposed to drive the Taliban or anti-coalition forces into our position. We were supposed to take them prisoner. They dropped everybody right on top of the Taliban cave complexes, and a firefight ensued. It was, people were shooting each other at 50 meters. To this day, I don't know why no one died. We had 28 wounded out of 82 in a blocking position, Ginger, and the number of them were shot with 7.62 rounds through the chest plate or through the back plate. And had they not had that body armor, we would have probably seen at least a dozen dead that morning in the first hour. But intel dropped right on top of that. That's on a tactical level. On a larger level, yeah, I think we have some real serious intel issues. I mean, I think I heard something on NPR a couple days ago, and they were talking about, in our reliance on satellite intel and SIGINT and stuff like that. And that's not a new argument. I mean, the National Reconnaissance Office was opened during the Cold War, and assets started shifting from human intel to this eavesdropping stuff. Intel capability went down. The reason is because you can count. A satellite can tell you how many tanks the Iraqis had surrounding Baghdad until they pull them under a freeway overpass and they don't know. But they can't tell you intent. And I think one thing that Intel has not provided is intent. A friend of mine used to work for the CIA years ago, and she told me that, back then, she said, North Korea and Iran, complete black hole. We don't have any human assets in those areas at all. So we have satellites go over there all the time, but we don't know intent, and we don't know who's moving and shaking on the ground. And I think it's a real problem. As far as weapons of mass destruction issue, wow, that was weird, I kind of even assumed that we'd find something because we knew they, gassed the Kurds in the 80s, but, it was not, there were those incidents, but that was a while ago. And, I don't know where it is. I've talked to some people that are still totally convinced that there's those weapons are there. They just haven't found them yet. I don't know how we could have missed them if they're there. If they're, I don't know. I do think there's some serious intel issues on tactical level and on a more strategic level. I don't know what will become of it, but something needs to be sorted out. But without being in the intel community, I don't even really know where to start on that. But I know intel is completely Salmon Pack. I mean, SF came and scared us all to death, telling us there was 1,000 to 3,000 enemy personnel sitting around waiting to kill us all, and we got in there and there was nobody there. So I don't know when they even got that intel report. But I guess it's better to be prepared. In that case, it's better to have been prepared than not. But I don't know where I don't know how old that intel report was. Maybe there was 1,000 to 3,000 people 4 days earlier. But after, I don't know. I don't know. You can go to my website, our website, Combat Films, and buy it. Please do. So,
How did the Iraqi people feel about the Allied forces?
In the southern parts, Al Numaniya, everybody I felt genuinely happy to see us. When we got into Salmon Pack, it was completely the situation. The reason we only had 208 guys rolling in to attack this and grab this intel was we had to have two other companies in blocking position in the city of Salmon Pack because there's a real fear that the Salmon Pack residents would block or maybe RPGs, Molotov cocktails. Nobody knew, but it was known to be as a real sort of Saddam hotbed, and it was. In fact, when we drove through, people were just stone-faced, and they didn't wave at us at all. They didn't do anything. In fact, a couple of guys flipped me off when I tried to wave at them, and back in the southern part of Iraq, everyone was jumping up and down, just happy as it could be. So in that case, at that point, but there's still, I think what's really interesting, something that's interesting to me is I think Saddam, in a weird way, may have won the propaganda war, because when I ventured out of the group, I went to this kebab shop, and I left my unit, and I started talking to about 15 to 20 Iraqi men, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I told them. I said, "What are you guys doing? What's going on?" They said, "Well, we're here, we're glad you're here, but we know that each soldier gets $100,000 to steal the oil for Bush." And I said, "How do you know that?" And they go, "Because it's on the radio all the time." I said, "What's radio?" "Iraqi radio." And Saddam's message was out, and it was more loud and clear than ours was. The fact that they all believed that kind of took me back a little bit. I was surprised. I assured them that every soldier would be more than happy to have $100,000 for that little adventure, and but it just wasn't going to be the case at all. But they didn't believe me at all, and so I thought that was really interesting. And these are the ones that were friendly to us, or friendly, to U.S. forces. But I think, as any, there is a real pride, and there's a hearts and minds issue out there that's really, really a battle that's being waged for hearts and minds and American doctrine and foreign policy abroad. And we don't link it to the Palestinian issue, but they link it to the Palestinian issue. A lot of Muslims see it as a Muslim issue, even though we say it's not. And I don't know what the answer is, but we need to do a better job. But maybe we got to sort that out. Seriously, have to sort that out, because their side of the story is it's certainly legit. And so I think in that sense, a lot of Iraqis would be I think most Iraqis would probably be happy when the U.S. troops go. I'm not saying that they're going to conduct terrorist attacks. I think that's only a certain core element of Iraqis and foreigners, because it's free time to kill them. It's like, hey, you can go kill an American in Iraq. You don't have to go very far. There's a lot of people in the Middle East that would be very happy to get a chance to do that. And all my time in the Caucasus and Chechnya, I met a lot of Arabs fighting in Chechnya. And it's just another place they get a chance to do that. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the Marines, they're young, and they were suspicious, and probably rightfully so, but they were suspicious. For instance, there's a scene in the film where we drink tea, but the backstory on that is they were afraid to drink the tea because they thought it might be poisoned. I'm like, no, we're with a Bedouin. We came to his house. They didn't have this poisoned tea waiting for 100 years to kill somebody. So I drank the first 2 glasses of tea, and then the lieutenant and the sergeant sat down. But I've been in the area a lot, and so I was very comfortable doing that. The soldiers weren't very comfortable doing that at first, and some loosened up faster than others. We had very few Arabic speakers. We had actually 2 Arabic speakers in our entire battalion. It's not enough. They were recruiting Iraqi exiles out of the Detroit area, and everybody that I met who was a contract translator was an Iraqi exile, living in the Detroit area. We had 1 for our company. Our company, 208 men, when we went down to Umaniyah, we had 7 patrols working simultaneously. We needed an Arabic speaker on every patrol, because I went on patrol every day, in the morning and the night, in the evening, and everybody wanted to come up and talk to you, and very few Iraqis could speak English. So it was communication was hard. It was difficult.
Psychologically, how do you feel like soldiers prepared as far as the time waiting, and then the first time they hit combat? I'm sure they were expected to get right in and go out of it when they had to spend that time waiting.
Yeah.
And then when they did see combat for the first time, how well psychologically do you think they were prepared to handle and take their training?
Actually, I was amazed at how well, that the training seemed to kick in. The wait's hard for anybody, It was hard for me, It's like 9 weeks in Kuwait we waited, and I was lucky. I flew my wife over, and we went down south to a resort for a week midway through, because I just knew we had 4 more weeks. Because I said, well, where's our fault? I went into, we had complete access. That's one thing I should say, too, is we had absolute 100% access to all intelligence from my battalion. The battalion commander, we had a gentleman's agreement that I wouldn't send anything out that would compromise our situation. So I knew our plan the day I arrived in Kuwait. So for 9 weeks, I sat on that knowledge. And when I realized that the British 7th Armour was going to be our follow-up, and then I realized they were being loaded in Portsmouth, England, I thought, oh my gosh, we have like a month. So I called my wife and said, why don't you come over and, we'll chill out in Kuwait for a while. Those soldiers had a much harder time because they were confined to the tent. We had 80 people sleeping in our tent and 2 platoons. But they keep them busy. And one thing the sergeants told us, he kept telling the men, hey, I know we ramp you up, spin you down, ramp you up, spin you down. We don't know when the call is going to come. It's an executive decision. So, they did a lot of training, but not too much training. We were actually forbidden to do a lot of physical training because they didn't want anybody to have sprain an ankle or break a wrist. We did some chokehold training so everybody could be choked until they passed out and then got up again. But you couldn't roll around anything that might break an arm or something like that. So it was pretty restricted. We did a lot of paintball training, kicking indoors or shooting each other with paintball guns, attach a different barrel to your M16 and just blast away at each other all day long. But you wear face masks and stuff. Things like that kept the Marines going, but psychologically, I think they were all relieved to get into combat because they'd waited so long, and I heard it over and over. I don't really want to go, but then again, I kind of want to see how I'm going to do, and just anything was better than the waiting because every week you'd have this silly talk from the staff sergeant come in and he'd say, this could be the last 9 days of your life. Let's think how we're going to live it. And I hated those talks because whenever I've traipsed around combat zones, I always usually go by myself. I don't sort of subscribe to that kind of emotional, I don't know what that's supposed to do, but for me, it was a downer. For them, I guess it bonded them together. But I'm like, well, how else could you live your 9 days if this is your last 9 days? Because you're sitting in a camp with a bunch of other Marines. There's nothing really you can do except write a bunch of letters. There were no phone lines working. Those talks were hard for me. I didn't like them at all. In fact, I went to one. I didn't go to any more. But I think they were really happy to get going. So, because they all had the idea, if we get going, we get to go home sooner. It's not necessarily how it works, but they kind of all thought that way. The other big myth in the Marine Corps was we don't do peacekeeping. I heard that every single day. It's, the Army does peacekeeping. So they had this general assumption that once we seize Baghdad and kill everybody who's bad, we're going to go straight home on the boat. Yeah, there's no way that was going to happen, but that's what everybody wanted to believe. So, anything else? Hey, go ahead. How the Iraqis view the U.S. being there now that we have Saddam? They said that they thought it might be. I don't know. I think that you have 3 elements that are fighting U.S. forces or coalition forces. You have maybe regime loyalists, and that part may die away. But you still have a lot of people who are just anti-American, anti-Western, who see it as a war against Islam. And there's some foreigners sliding in over the borders that are from Syria and different places. Those group, that is not Saddam, they probably didn't like Saddam either because he was a pretty bad Muslim when you think about it. And then you have the revenge factor. War is not clean. It never is. We killed a number of civilians. The body count website, and it's a nonpartisan website, basically says, I think they're saying 3,000 to 5,000 Iraqi civilians and 10,000 to 12,000 Iraqi military. And I mentioned this last time. In my opinion, we didn't kill near enough Iraqi soldiers because if we only killed 10,000, that's not enough. That means there's way too many running around because their army was much, and the Republican Guard units were much bigger than that. On the other side, 3,000 to 5,000 civilians. That's not good, but that's combat. I mean, the creep back of the bombing runs into Germany and France in World War II killed over 40,000 French civilians. But now, when everything is TV and it's as soon as you kill civilians, it's on TV for the 5 o'clock news. It's tough, so it's a different fact. It's a different way to look at combat. I think that also, if you kill somebody with a smart bomb by accident, I'm not saying it's forgivable, but it's different than if you shoot up a car of women and children at a checkpoint because you think the car might be a suicide bomb, and for some reason they run the checkpoint. I don't know why some of those cars full of people would run the checkpoint, but they did, and a lot of them lost their lives because of it. There was that demonstration of, I think it was Fallujah last year, ended up in like 19 or 20 Iraqis dead. Iraqis said nothing was happening. The soldiers said we were being fired on. Doesn't matter, he killed 19 to 20 demonstrators. There are those people now who are dedicated to killing U.S. soldiers just because they're going to avenge the life of someone that they knew. So I think those 3 elements make up the opposition to the coalition. And so while you may have the regime loyalists, they may settle down a little bit and melt into society and realize that regime's done. You still have another 2/3 of those units that are those groups are very committed. And I think that commitment's not going to die away soon.